Hello.
Hey Kendall,
How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So how's your day going so far?
Pretty good.
That's awesome.
Welcome to Just Mental. We're very excited to have you here and help you share your story.
Hi guys, I'm Billy William Kemm, and basically I wanted to come on the show and just share a bit of my story, like where I came from and what I'm doing now. I've been through a lot in my life. When I was 10 years old, I was diagnosed with T-cell leukemia, and basically, if anyone knows what that's, it was like I went to the Western medical route, which is chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and then I actually went out of remission, so I had to have a bone marrow transplant. And I had a pretty normal childhood. I was into sports and stuff and playing hockey and soccer. Like I was a super active kid, super healthy up until this point. And like I said, I was 10 years old, grade four, and all of a sudden I just got really sick. And it started off with just some stomach cramps and then escalated to the point where couldn't even get out of bed. I was in just so much pain and agony. And then finally my parents, they took me to the hospital and they basically told my parents I had T-cell leukemia and they didn't know what to do. They were scared. They were scared I was going to die. I guess like I wasn't never scared as a kid, right? So the thought of death never crossed my mind, which is probably a good thing. So my parents, they didn't know anything, right? They just sent me into the hospital. I actually got a lot of anger and stuff that I had to let go of from what happened then, right? Because some people might disagree with my point of view now, but basically you're a guinea pig in there. They're called medical practitioners for a reason. They practice medicine on you. And so basically I suffered a lot of different illnesses to do with the treatments because it's a super, super toxic drug, right? Chemotherapy, it's like one of the most toxic things you can put in your body. And so I got pancreatitis and stuff like that. So we'd have to have super long hospital stays. This one time I stayed in there for 3 months straight and I had a feeding tube in my nose and I was on morphine and stuff. I couldn't eat and like it was just bad. It's like a rough thing for a child to go through. I made friends with some kids in there too, and none of them, my mom made friends with their parents. Actually, none of those kids survived. The survival rate was around 12%, which is it's pretty low, right? And so, like I said, I went through a lot with that. And then when I had my bone marrow transplant, again, that was another tough time because they gave me 10 rounds of full body radiation. And what that does is basically it burns you from the inside out. And I was just in agonizing pain. So they had me on tons and tons of morphine, like basically enough to drop an elephant, right? That's how much morphine I could withstand because of the pain I was in. It damaged my voice box. It damaged a bunch of organs and stuff, and it stunted my growth. But fortunately, I survived. A lot of kids, like I said, didn't survive what I went through. So I'm just blessed to have made it through that. And my mom never left my side the whole time I was there. She even stayed in the hospital on a cot beside my bed. And she was like my rock through all that, right? And just a huge part of my support going through all that. I don't know if I would have done it without her. And my dad was super busy. We had a massive pig farm and he was just super busy on the farm. So he never really had the opportunity to come and visit me. When I was coming home from one of my checkups, it was me, my mom, and my brother. And my mom was super tired and she fell asleep at the wheel and she went through a stop sign and we were T-boned. Me and my mom we flew through the windshield. I flew into the ditch and the vehicle landed on her and she was killed instantly. I suffered a fractured femur. I was knocked unconscious in the ditch. And my brother, he was fortunate. He was wearing a seatbelt. And so he just had some minor scrapes and bruises. But I remember when I came to in the ditch, the first thing I screamed for was my mom. Like I had a fractured femur, but that wasn't on my mind. The pain wasn't on my mind. And I was just like screaming, where's my mom? Where's my mom? How's my mom? And they told me she was fine. I got airlifted to the hospital. I had some huge scar on my face. It's you can't even see it now, but I just remember being in the hospital and this the whole time I was like, where's my mom? Where's my mom? And they're telling me she's fine, she's fine. And you can see her when you get into your room. And eventually they told me obviously that she didn't make it, she didn't survive, and just devastated me and my brother. At that time, I was a kid, I didn't really know how much that would traumatize me in the future, but I never dealt with that emotional trauma or I blamed myself. Obviously, as a kid, I didn't know. I blamed myself. I blamed other people, and it just sent me on a bad path. Basically, I started acting out and stealing. A lot of it's pretty blurry. I don't really remember exactly when all these things happened, but I started acting out and drinking and smoking and even stealing my dad's booze and taking it into school. This was in grade eight, pretty young, right? A lot of kids aren't really doing that at that age. And we ended up moving away from where we were living in Alberta just to get away and get closer to family. So we moved to the island where my dad's sister was, and we started living with them. And me and my brother just we just kept going down a bad path and skipping school, and yeah, just really acting out, starting to get into drinking a lot more. I mentioned too, I was put in school when we initially moved there, but basically I got picked on a lot because my voice was different, my growth was stunted, and kids can be pretty harsh, right? And so basically I ended up leaving that school. I went to an alternate school, and I was like full of anxiety and fear, and like, I felt like I didn't fit in, and I felt really uncomfortable in my own skin, honestly. I met some kids in the smoke pit, and so I ended up just hanging out with these kids, and these kids were like down the same path. Eventually my dad had enough. He didn't know what to do with me, and basically he told me I had to go. And I was 15 years old by the time that came, and I basically had nowhere to go. I didn't know what to do. So I phoned up my uncle, and he lived in Kamloops. He said, yeah, come live with me, and he wanted to help me and try and straighten me out, right? That was probably his plan at the time. So I moved down to Kamloops, which was about 5 hours away. And I did okay for a little while. My cousin was a few years older than me, and she was heavy into partying and stuff as well. I started hanging out with her more, getting into that party scene again, and everything else just fell apart. I wasn't going to school. At that point, I got into selling weed and mushrooms and met some people that were doing that, and that kind of escalated. It got to the point where I was drinking and smoking weed every day because yeah, I felt that at the time it really helped my anxiety. It got me out of that. It made me like way more sociable, obviously, and it just made my life so much more enjoyable. So I'd wake up in the morning and I'd just get a nice buzz on, and then I'd go about my day. I was a 15-year-old kid. To support my habit, I was stealing and smoking, or sorry, selling weed and selling mushrooms and stuff. And eventually it was about 3 years of that where my uncle he just was beside himself. He didn't know what to do. And he told me I had to leave. And at that time, my brother, he was basically going through the same thing. He was a year and a month older than I am. He was doing all the same things, right? Drinking and doing drugs and selling drugs. Basically, he was connected to some organized crime guys. And so I talked to him a bit, and he said, come on down, come work with me. And so that's what I did. I moved back to the island where he was. I ended up moving into one of his houses, and basically these guys taught me how to grow weed. And so I got into that for a while. I was making a lot of money, and for whatever reason, I just became super addicted to just making money. It got me away from the drinking every day, and it just really built my confidence. And I know it's not, obviously it wasn't a good thing at the time, but that was my mindset. That was what I was going to do, and no one was going to tell me different, right? Most people don't understand my mentality, but I felt like the world owed me something. I was a super angry kid, and it kept me sober for quite some time. I was still smoking weed every day, but I wasn't drinking. Like, it was pretty manageable. I ended up buying a place. Me and my brother bought a place when I was 19 years old. And that's when I got back into drugs again. I was isolated out there, and I was introduced to crystal meth through some guy, an associate I was working with. And I didn't start doing it daily right away. If everyone's ever done meth, they know it's obviously it's a super powerful drug, right? And the first time I did it, it was just like I loved it. And it was just a matter of time before I broke down and went and did it again. And basically it snowballed from there. I could fight it for a few days, and then before I knew it, I was doing it every day. This went on for basically years, right? Eventually I got into doing other drugs, like street drugs and ketamine and stuff like that. And again, that was just like a party type thing. And I got introduced to Oxycontins, started doing those daily because it just reminded me of doing morphine when I was a child. Basically, like the best way to describe it is like a warm hug from God. And it was just the best feeling ever. And the first time I did Oxycontins, I did them every day since the crime got worse. I basically got into dealing the hard drugs and stuff and just paying people to do bad things. So it's a really scary place to be, but I was just consumed with drugs and making money, and I didn't think about it. And so that's how my life was for quite a few years, until basically my addiction got to the point where I just couldn't manage it anymore. I'd be boarded up in my house, so paranoid. I'd be peeking out my windows and stuff. I'd see whole SWAT teams that weren't even there. And basically I wasn't paying my mortgage anymore. I started losing my house. and I started losing everything. I decided to go to detox first. That didn't work. So I was back out, back doing what I was doing. And then I decided this time I'll try treatment, try and go there for a few months. And for whatever reason, I couldn't even stay sober in treatment. That's how consumed I was with my addiction. And I fought with it for years, in and out of treatment, in and out of detox facilities, more times than I can count. And then you start getting picked up by the cops because they're knowing what I was all about. And so I'd be getting arrested all the time. And eventually that leads to jail time. I remember my first time to jail, I'm pretty small, right? Like I'm a small dude. I'm 5'3". And at the time I was 83 pounds. And as I'm going to jail, I'm thinking like, I'm never going to do this again. And I didn't know what to expect. I was terrified, thinking of all the things that are going to happen to me in there. And fortunately enough, I knew a couple guys in there, like they're the biggest guys in the unit, which was my saving grace, right? So I did okay in there. I didn't get messed with too bad. But still, the whole time I was in there, I was always thinking, I'm going to straighten my life out. I'm never going to do this again. And basically, that all changed just by talking to guys in there, and they tell me they got all these good connections. And then before I knew it, right when I got out there, the first day I was back doing what I was doing again. My mentality was insane. And I thought I could go back to doing what I was doing and stay sober, but obviously that's not the case. And so basically I was back in and out of jail again, and my life was just absolutely hopeless. I ended up starting to get some health complications. I had to get my gallbladder removed. I mentioned to my dad, basically, in the time I was doing dope and stuff, he started aging just drastically, and he'd phone me crying and just begging me to stop doing drugs. And so that kind of weighed on me too. And so I thought I'd give treatment another try. My dad and my lawyer actually arranged for me when I left jail this one time to go straight to treatment. So that's how I got out on a shorter sentence than what I should have gotten. I finished that. I actually stayed sober this time in treatment, and I ended up moving away to try and stay away from the things that I was doing and just start a whole new life, right? But again, it like followed me down there. I had a friend down there, and he phoned me up, and he was doing drugs, and I fell right back into it again, back into treatment. And this time I like hit a whole new low. I got kicked out of treatment for doing dope and stuff again, and I ended up homeless on Hastings. If anybody knows Hastings, it's like a homeless place in Vancouver. East End's Hastings, it's called. The best way to describe it is like the Night of the Living Dead down there. Like it's absolutely horrific. There's an alley on there. It's called Blood Alley, and there's literally like blood and feces and urine down there. People are ODing there daily. It's really bad. There's literally thousands and thousands of people on this East Hastings Street, and it's like I said, it's the worst thing you could imagine. And so that was like a real eye opener. But I was consumed by my addiction, and that's where I ended up homeless down there. I ended up getting on methadone. I never wanted to get on methadone because it's the most powerful addicting substance there is on the planet. And so I just didn't want to have anything to do with that. But because I was struggling so bad to maintain my addiction, and if you know what heroin's like, when you don't have heroin, you get super, super sick. It gets so bad where like you're puking and literally defecating yourself, and you feel like you're dying. Basically, I did not want to go through that. I never went through that before because I always made enough money to support my habit. But like I said, I was homeless on Hastings, so obviously I didn't have a lot. And so I was just really fearful of that. So I got on methadone, and looking back on it, it was like a saving grace because I would go to this methadone clinic every day to get my methadone. And it was like a daily reprieve. They'd treat me so good, they'd feed me, and they were just really loving and kind to me, which I hadn't experienced for so long because of my situation and where I was. One of the guys who worked down there, he was a recovered drug addict. And so me and him really clicked, and we became pretty good friends while I was down there. And he encouraged me to go back to treatment, and he actually got me into detox and got me into a treatment center. And that was my first step into actually getting clean. I was in super rough condition. And basically, long story short, I ended up working at the treatment center, and I'd gained a year's sobriety doing that. And it just really gave me a purpose, like helping people. I ended up picking up another job, and then actually I just way overworked myself. I started struggling again, right? I started getting that insanity coming back into my head again, where I was getting really bad anxiety, depression. And I started thinking about doing drugs again. I remember it was pretty fresh in my memory of where that had taken me last time. I didn't want to go back to that. And so for whatever reason, I'd never had this thought before, but my head was telling me basically to kill myself. I was thinking to myself, I don't want to do dope again. You may as well just kill yourself. I was scared of living daylights. I actually got down on my hands and knees and I started crying out to God for him just to help me. I ended up going into like this other job I had as a painter, and I never go to work usually on the Saturdays, but for whatever reason I went there this day on a Saturday, and this guy came up to me. This is a huge part of the story, that's what I'm telling, but this guy came up to me and he asked me for a ride home, and I'd seen him in passing. We said hi and stuff, and I said, yeah, sure. I was like, I don't mind giving you a ride home, and just let me finish up what I'm doing here and I'll give you a ride. And so as I'm giving this guy a ride home, we were chit-chatting, and he started telling me this story about how he had gotten glyphosate poisoning to the point where it was like so built up in his body where he started getting super, super sick before he got sick. He was going to be a pro rugby player. He was a personal trainer. Guy was 19 years old, like the peak picture of health, right? And one day he just got super, super sick where he could barely get out of bed. And that progressed quite rapidly, where he started losing his eyesight and he was just in so much pain all the time. He could hardly sleep. His parents sent him all over the world, the USA, India, and no one could tell him what was wrong with him. They told him it was all in his head, but he obviously knew there was something wrong with him. So he kept looking. And so he told me about this guy he had met who was a world-class holistic health and life coach. He told me how this guy saved his life, detoxed him. I saw this as an opportunity, like maybe this guy can help me because I had a lot of health problems and stuff too. He basically told me he's got a 99% success rate. And at that time, I was just like, yeah, there's no way, right? Because I was in AA and I was in NA, and I knew the success rate is basically it's 5% on the first year. And after that, it gets even worse. We talked for an hour on the phone. And he just blew my mind on the things he said and the truths I never really heard before. From there, he would just phone me like at random times, just checking in with me, seeing how I was doing. And we built a relationship. I ended up hiring him actually as my health and life coach. And he just drastically transformed my health first, which changed my whole life, freed me of all my addictions. So now it's been 5 years that I haven't done any drugs. I quit smoking cigarettes. I quit everything. And now I'm just completely freed of every addiction I ever had, which is mind blowing.
That is an incredible story. And thank you
Yeah.
very much for your bravery in sharing that. I can't imagine having gone through all of that and then getting to a place where you are right now,
Hmm.
seemingly very, I guess I can ask you, are you happy now?
Yeah, I'm super happy now for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's hard to explain it all in just that short amount of time, but my life was hell. It's an absolute miracle I'm alive. I OD'd 3 times. They brought me back to life one time. They had to resuscitate me with the shock to defibrillate me, and just so many horrific things. High-speed chases, like shootouts. It was just insane. My life was a mess. I'm nowhere near where I want to be, but I'm getting and improving every day. So it's amazing.
Sometimes the best thing that you can do is just put one foot in front of the other and just move
Hmm.
towards where you want to be. It doesn't always
Yeah.
happen overnight. And you are a testament to that, that if you make the
Mhm.
small changes every day, eventually you'll get closer to living the life that you want to live.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I always like to ask people this because I find it's very interesting. If you could go back and you can talk to your younger self, tell him something that maybe you wish someone would have told you when you were really struggling, what would you say?
Yeah, that's a deep question. Honestly, I don't think there's a single thing you could say. I believe we have a journey, and for whatever reason, I had that journey and I needed to go through it. I wish so many things had happened differently, but they didn't. So yeah, I wish I could answer that better, but honestly, I don't think there's something I can say other than just maybe that's a deep question. I honestly don't know. Yeah.
That's totally
Like I
fair.
would say you're loved, man. I would just say you're loved, right? And like there's people that love you and you're worth it. As far as the doing the drugs and stuff, like for me, you couldn't tell me nothing, right? No one could tell me don't do drugs. There's people that told me and warned me and all that stuff, right? And I was just so angry. I wish my dad was different, but I can't. Yeah. So sorry, that's like a kind of a complicated way to answer that.
No, everybody's answer is
Mm.
unique to them. And I agree
Yeah.
that obviously your story is, like you said, it's crazy. And
Mm.
there's obviously things that I don't wish anybody to have to go through. But I do
Hmm.
believe at the end of the day that what we go through shapes us into who we are. And so
Exactly.
I do agree that the journey is important. Now, you mentioned that you wished that your dad was different. Can you talk about that a little bit and what that means?
Yeah, for sure. He wasn't perfect like everyone. He had a lot of issues. He was super angry dude. He was a workaholic. And when my mom died, that devastated him too, right? That was his wife. And so he just didn't really have the tools at that time to deal with all. And honestly, he didn't know what to do with me, my brother. And we suffered, right?
Do you
And
resent
we
him for
didn't.
that?
Do I resent him now for that? No, I don't. Not at all. I did for a long time. Really, I did. Yeah. Until I realized he was just a victim of his environment as well. Just like we all are, right? We're living in a broken, lost world as far as I'm concerned. And no one's perfect, right? That's my thoughts, anyways.
Having gone through all of that, what are some of your biggest lessons that you will pass down to your kids?
There's so many. Honestly, my kids will never go through that. I have support set up just in case that did happen. And then basically, it's just all about raising your kids, raising them in a loving, warm environment, which I didn't really have. And all it seemed like my parents fought all the time. Like I saw them physically fight and stuff, and it was bad. That's not going to happen with my kids. And so it would change a lot of things, I think.
Looking back, what impact did losing your mom at such a young age have? You talked
It
about
set me,
being angry as well. Can you talk about that a bit more? Like the world owed you something? I find that very
yeah,
interesting.
my mom was my world. Like we were best friends. Right? I was a mama's boy, right? And we were best friends. We had so much in common. And when I get emotional, it was horrific. And so it just made me angry. I felt like everything was taken from me. And that's just, yeah, it was tough.
I think that's a pretty knee-jerk reaction when something horrible happens. I think even talking to people and hearing, for example, when a younger kid gets cancer, that makes me angry. And you look outwards and you think, why do all these bad things have to happen to good people? And then you look at the world and you say, all of these people who are doing all these horrible things just get to keep living their life the way they've always lived it with no consequence. And you're here just trying to survive, and all of this stuff just keeps happening. Is there anything in your life now that you do on a daily basis that helps you to continue reaching for that highest version of yourself?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of things I do, honestly, but the biggest thing is just wanting to help and serve other people. That was taught to me in AA. If you're ever struggling, that would be like a good word of advice. Basically, we struggle because we're thinking of ourselves. And if you can get yourself outside yourself by helping someone else, that's the best way to do it. That's the only way to do it. It's to get yourself outside of yourself by helping others. Because then you're not going to be struggling because you're not worried about yourself. So anytime I'm ever down or whatever, I just phone someone up and just see how they're doing and try and help them, right?
I think
Or
that's a
go see
really good
someone.
point. I
Yeah.
love that's something that you've adopted, because if everybody could just be a little bit kinder, the
Mm,
world would just be a significantly better place. It would be better for
exactly.
everybody. And so
100%. Because love conquers everything. Because it just goes back to my childhood days. It's like that the house was filled with love. Who knows? None of that might have happened. Maybe my mom would still be alive. You know what I mean? Who knows? Like it changes things when there's, a bunch of anger and all that stuff. It's a culminating effect, right?
do you still have
It
a
affects.
relationship with your brother?
I do, yeah. My brother's doing amazingly well too. Thank God, right? Yeah, he's doing good. He's been sober almost as long as I have now, and he's doing it good.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
So what does life look like now for you? I guess at a fundamental level, and also what you do differently to maintain that level of happiness and
Mm.
peace, so to speak.
Okay. My day is super regimental. I'll wake up early. The first thing I do is, well, obviously I drink a ton of water, right? Water is super, super important, right? And then I actually read the Bible. I read the Bible an hour a day. It keeps me grounded, keeps me in peace. And then I do a little bit of exercise, usually some jogging, or sometimes I'll do some weightlifting. And then just eating and feeding my mind super healthy things. I don't eat any processed foods. I'm super radical about like my diet and stuff like that. Even people that think they're healthy and stuff, they laugh at me because like I don't eat out and stuff unless I know it's an organic restaurant or whatever, right? But yeah, everything that goes in my body is super, super clean. And same with my mind, right? I don't watch TV. I don't listen to rap music or whatever, like all the stuff I used to.
I think that's a good
They,
reminder that we are the impact or we are the
yeah,
result of what we consume on a daily basis,
100%. We are the product of that. Exactly.
of your
Yeah.
environment, of your thoughts, of what you're looking at on social media. That's a huge one I find, especially with this generation. I was actually just talking to someone about how we need to start looking at those things because they're very normal. All of these things are very normal. And a lot of the things that we're consuming at a young age, I don't think we realize the impact that those have as we get older.
Yeah, exactly. No, 100% for sure. Funny story because reminds me because my mom used to watch Pulp Fiction and stuff. And so that's a lot of drug use on there, which people think is whatever, right? But at 9 years old, me and my brother go trick or treating. We come home and you remember those candies, those rocket candies? Crush those up and snort them. So obviously that proves right there. My mom wasn't a drug addict, my dad wasn't a drug addict, but where did we get that from? Obviously it was from Pulp Fiction, right? It's just
Yes.
weird. So yeah, if you're a parent, that stuff affects your kids no matter what.
Kids are
It's
sponges and
they are
they
sponges.
absorb absolutely everything. And that's what, in talking to people, especially, and just hearing their stories, you start to
Mm,
understand the massive impact that your childhood and the way that you're brought up has on who you become. I think your story is a testament to that. That
yes.
not growing up in
Yeah.
an environment where you felt like you were loved or worthy or any of those things pushed you to go find that in other places. And it wasn't
Hmm.
until years later that you were able to come to the understanding that you are okay as you are and
Hmm.
you are a product of your environment, but you don't have to be necessarily, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. You can change yourself, right? It's never too late to change, but you will be a product of your environment. What I had to do was I had to get myself out of that environment and put myself in a new environment. And now I choose my environment every day. You know what I mean? I will not go and hang out with the people I hung out with. I had to excommunicate everyone from my life, even my family. The crazy thing is, once I started getting better, all my family was telling me this guy I was with, he was bad for me. He was this, he was that, you know what I mean? Because I don't know, for whatever reason, I can't explain it, but they saw him as a threat in my own family, you know what I mean? And which is weird. I struggled my whole life and now I'm getting free of all this. And now it's my family telling me I need to avoid this guy. Like that's just so I had to excommunicate everyone from my life until I was strong enough to set boundaries and stuff, right? But yeah, it's all about your environment. And it's a sad thing because as children, we don't have a choice of our environment. That's why it's super crucial to teach the new generation how to be adults. It's really saddens me to see just the way people are being brought up from every facet of society. This is designed, or society's been designed this way for a reason,
I
right?
think if the world was kinder and more loving, and that was reciprocated across every facet, then
Yeah.
one of our basic needs as humans is love. That is literally the only
Mhm.
thing besides like food and water that we need.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we're seeing the impact of not getting that, especially in childhood. So
Mhm.
I think if we can even just change the way that the conversation is being had or just start the conversation about those kinds of things, then the work that we do is worthwhile to some extent. And if it helps even just
Exactly.
one person, I've always said that. I just want to help one person. If I can help one person, I've done my job. If I help more, that's fantastic.
Yes, exactly.
But saving one person or helping one person, even if it's not the whole world, you're still
Mhm.
saving or changing the entire world for that one person.
Exactly. Yeah. That has an impact on other people as well.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Everything we do has an impact at some level.
Exactly.
And I think that's
Exactly.
another thing that people don't realize is we do the things that we do without realizing. For example, you could buy someone a coffee when you go to Starbucks or whatever, and that could change their entire day. That could be the thing that they needed to continue pushing forward every day. And I don't think we realize how even the littlest of things can literally make a world of a difference.
That's a good point, because that's maybe be a lot more mindful of myself as well, because I want to be the best version of myself so other people can see that and see that as a good example, right, of what's possible.
100%. 100%. I have one final question for you. What was the best piece of advice that you ever received? This can be from anybody or at any stage in your life.
The best piece of advice anyone's ever given me. That's a deep one. Again, there's so many, but the best one I would say, you are like the 6 people you hang around with the most.
There's a quote, if you want to change your life, change your circle.
Absolutely true.
I've even noticed that, like you said, we've talked about it a lot. You're a product of your environment. And I love that you bring that up. I think there's a lot of emotion that plays into who you keep around you as well. Especially when you're younger, you don't know how to say no. You don't know how to set boundaries. You maybe don't know how to end those relationships. But that's a good reminder that if you don't do those things, then eventually the toxic things that you don't like in your circle you're going to adopt those traits as well at some point.
That's just the way it is. Yeah. It's the way it happens. Yeah.
It was really nice getting to hear your story. Again, incredibly inspiring, impactful. And I'm honestly just really happy to see and hear that you're living and you're happy and you're just on the best path that you can be on.
Thank you so much for having me on